Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to Wow Week. We're going to take just a minute while people enter. We've got a lot of people signed up today. A lot of people with a lot of questions about travel insurance. We know that COVID has brought a lot of changes to the travel insurance landscape. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So I think we have some hardcore sort of travelers here, tonight. So we're thrilled to have you. We'll just take one more minute, maybe. Let's see. Okay, well, why don't we've got a lot to cover. So why don't we go ahead and get started. If I didn't say so already, I'm Wendy Perrin from WendyPerrin.com, and welcome to Wow Week. Top of mind for many of you is, if I'm going to travel now, how do I protect myself in this new world we're in? How do I protect my health? How do I protect my money if I pay a lot in advance for a trip? And COVID has brought so many changes to the whole idea of like, how do you protect yourself, and the various tools out there and the various pros and cons of all the tools, that we just felt we had to devote one of our precious Wow Week days to digging into this for you. Travel insurance isn't your only decision. It's not the only way to protect yourself, because in addition to that, there are types of emergency travel assistance memberships as well. And so first, I'd like to just take a moment to thank our Wow Week sponsor, which is one of those types of emergency assistance, MedJet, which is one piece of this sort of travel protection puzzle. MedJet is a global medical transport and crisis response membership that you could get on top of travel insurance. I've had a family MedJet membership for many years, since long before Wow Week ever existed. But most important, MedJet makes it possible for me and the team to answer your gazillion travel questions, even at 3 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. And so thank you, MedJet, for doing that. And now I would like to introduce Brooke Wilkinson on the team. Brooke, many of you already know Brooke, because she is in fact one of our journalists who is there answering your travel questions at 3 o'clock, even on a Sunday morning. And so Brooke, over to you, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Wendy asked me to moderate this evening because I've done several deep dives into travel insurance over the years. You can find those insurance articles on WendyPerrin.com. If you go to the COVID-19 drop-down menu in the black navigation bar at the top of our website, there are also other articles in that same menu full of COVID era travel intel. So that's just a good place to be aware of on our website. I want to introduce our three panelists for the evening. With us is Sherry Howell of MedJet, the medical transport and travel security membership program that Wendy just described. And we also have experts from two of the most useful comparison sites for travel insurance. These sites allow you to input your trip dates, the cost of your trip, your age, other variables, and the sites will generate side-by-side comparisons of your best insurance options. We have Megan Walsh from insuremytrip.com and Stan Sandberg from travelinsurance.com. A lot of topics came up over and over in the questions that viewers submitted ahead of this discussion. So we're going to start by addressing those topics, and then we'll take additional questions from the Q&A box. So if you have questions that don't come up, ask them there rather than by raising your hand or putting a question in the chat. Okay, with that, we'll start. I'm going to start with you, Megan. Are there certain trips for which people need travel insurance, and other trips where you just don't need to buy travel insurance?
So I really think it all depends on your comfort level. It might be a trip, not too far away, not expensive. Really, it's if you have an amount of money invested that you would not be comfortable losing. If you're, traveling abroad and need medical coverage, it's really your comfort level and how much of an investment you want to protect.
And those are the two main areas that you hit on for insurance, right? It's protection for your financial investment and protection for any possible medical issue that might arise. Stan, how has travel insurance changed since COVID? Are there new things that it does or does not cover now? Have premiums changed greatly?
Sure. First of all, Wendy, thank you very much for having me, and Brooke, thank you for the invite. It's a really timely discussion right now because people are all kind of now coming back into the travel market for the first time in well over a year, and it's probably the most important consideration in terms of trip planning today because of all of the sort of various things that could affect a trip. And so, I just wanted to just add one quick thing to your first question because, it's important. I think you can make a strong case for travel insurance for really just about any trip, and splitting up the medical piece from the trip cancellation piece. There are a lot of people who travel today who, especially when they travel internationally, aren't even aware that their healthcare coverage at home doesn't follow them when they leave the country. And so travel insurance becomes a super easy way to build that protection into a trip. Likewise, as Megan said, if you have a lot of money invested into a trip, typically those costs are non-refundable. You've paid them upfront. If, God forbid, you were to get sick before you traveled and had to cancel, while you might get some sympathy from the airlines and the hotels and the resorts that you booked, they're not obligated to reimburse you for those costs, and that's where travel insurance becomes a valuable protection for your invested costs. And so, sort of segueing into the second question, which is how have things changed? In a pre-COVID world, there are a lot of plans that had general exclusions for a pandemic and an epidemic. It kind of was one of those exclusions that was standard in many plans because, who's concerned about a pandemic or an epidemic? It was almost unfathomable that that would be something that we would have to contend with. Of course, hurricanes, getting sick before you travel, those are all very common reasons that would affect a trip, but not a pandemic. And so what we saw very sort of quickly into this new post-COVID world was the carriers actually starting to accommodate the COVID illnesses and treating it like any other standard medical illness. So, for example, if in pre-COVID world, if you got sick and were exposed to a pandemic and that was a cause for canceling a trip, you might not have coverage. The changes the carriers made to accommodate meant that if you had a trip booked and you unexpectedly contracted COVID and exhibited symptoms and got sick and you were not able to travel as a result, that would be treated like any other unexpected illness or sickness, and you would have cancellation coverage. And then that extends to trip interruption, which is very similar to trip cancellation coverage, except it comes into play when you've already left or you're already on your trip. So to the extent you're traveling in a destination and contracted COVID and couldn't continue the trip because you were sick, there would be coverage to reimburse you for those unused prepaid portions of the trip. And that probably was the biggest change we saw in the last year.
And premiums, have they changed much?
No. The sort of natural cycle of premium changes occurs when companies are introducing new products. And because, as a reminder, travel insurance, much like any other insurance product, is regulated by the state insurance regulators. Even the pricing of travel insurance is regulated. So once a carrier comes up with a product and brings it to market, that product is filed. And you can have some variations and some level of range within the pricing grid that the companies file. But for the most part, they're not changing frequently. And in the case of the of COVID and what we experienced in the last year, in some cases, carriers introduced new products at more competitive pricing, as opposed to what some people believe might be an opportunity to raise prices. It actually went the other way.
Interesting. Yeah. Megan, so if Insure My Trip would not have to exist if there was a one size fits all, works for everyone travel insurance policy out there, right? So clearly that doesn't happen. How does a traveler figure out what insurance they need? Are there guidelines you can give about a reasonable minimum for coverage for medical bills, other must-haves that you really should be making sure that your insurance policy includes?
Right. So when you're comparing policies, you get so many options,
Yeah.
and we get it. It can be a very confusing process, and just trying to figure out what's covered, what's not covered. Reading 30+ page documents to find all the fine print. So with our site, we try to make it easy for customers to compare the plans. And I think, you want to look at all the different coverages. So trip cancellation, what is covered, what's not covered. And I think as Stan was mentioning, you have different levels of products. So you might have, a more economy-based product, a mid-range, and then a high-end product. And really, you're going to want to take a look at the limits and see, I know I said this before, but what you're most comfortable with. And, say you are traveling abroad and you're looking at medical coverage, it is good to know what you are covered for by your primary. And typically that's not a lot. So, a trip within the US, you may have coverage here. So you may not have to look at a plan that has high limits. But if you're going abroad somewhere, you may want to, look at something that would offer a little bit more coverage. And also, with the different levels of plans, they may cover different things under trip cancellation, trip interruption. The number one covered reason is being an unforeseen illness, injury, or death of you, a traveling companion. But there are also other covered reasons for canceling and interrupting your trip. It may be due to weather. There could be work reasons, a whole bunch of different things. So, it's really just a matter of looking into what the policy covers for that. Also other limits too. So some may offer travel delay, coverage if your bags are lost or damaged. And just what your, again, your comfort level is for those amounts
I've
of
seen
coverage.
policies that have, in terms of medical coverage, everything from $25,000 to $200,000, sky's the limit if you're going to pay more in premium. Is there, in your experience, and any of you panelists, do you have thoughts on, a hospital bill? You spend one night in the hospital and you're going to be spending a lot more than $25,000. Or have you seen, kind of trends in how much coverage is really going to be worthwhile if you are seriously injured abroad?
Well, we're not insurance and we don't, really speak to insurance, but anytime we're posed that question, generally we recommend a minimum of $50,000 worth of medical coverage.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody was going to put a number on it, that's the classic one that we come out with, because we do recommend that people carry, travel insurance, particularly the medical emergency component of it, along with, of course, us, but
Yeah.
Let's check on the insurance question.
And by the way, that floor 50,000 is you typically see that as in certain visa requirements require you to have a certain level of medical coverage. And typically you see that is around 50,000. And so that is sort of your starting point. You can, of course, get coverage or coverage limits less than 50,000. And you can also get, as you mentioned, limits, up to 250,000 in a traditional trip cancellation plan. But if you were to seek out an international medical plan, there are a lot of options available in the market. They don't have trip cancellation. That's the one distinguishing feature. They are really focused on just strictly the medical coverage. Those plans can be very, very cost effective. They tend to be much less expensive. You can get up to $1 million of medical limit in those types of plans. And so that's another option. But when you're looking at the U.S. market and U.S. travelers, when people talk about travel insurance, I'd say about 90% of them are talking about a trip cancellation plan, and that's really been the focus of this marketplace.
Interesting. Megan, you mentioned the fine print, which is something we heard about a lot in the questions we got ahead of this evening. People are worried, are there exclusions in the fine print that I'm not going to see, that it's going to trip me up in some way? Are there common exclusions? I mean, I'm sure we would all recommend that travelers read that fine print, but are there common things that show up there? It sounds like pandemic coverage used to be one of those exclusions, but are there things that people should look out for, the common surprises in what's not covered?
Right. So, yeah, as you mentioned, some did have the pandemic exclusions. Also, a big one to keep in mind is coverage for pre-existing conditions. Mm-hmm. And that one is not cut and dry most of the time. I know our reps get a lot of questions about pre-existing conditions for not only travelers, but also non-traveling family members. And, what's covered, what's not covered, can we get coverage for them? And, so when it comes to different questions like that, I know our reps do field a lot to do with that. And that is one thing we try to make clear on our plans is if you are eligible for coverage to cover pre-existing conditions, or if you're not, what plans may work or have the least amount of time that the company would look back into your medical records to see if something is related to a pre-existing condition. Mm-hmm. So, we try to look at it from all avenues. From when you purchase the plan, when you first made payments toward your trip, because to get coverage for pre-existing conditions, it's typically a time-sensitive benefit on the plans. And when I say that, what I mean is it's from when you initially purchase or pay any money towards your trip. They're going to look at that time period and when you're purchasing the policy, and see if you are eligible for coverage for pre-existing conditions.
Mm-hmm. So the clock starts ticking as soon as you put down that first deposit, and you have, is it usually a week, 2 weeks in which you would be able to get your pre-existing conditions covered?
Right. Yeah. Usually we see it's somewhere around like 10 to 21 days after making the initial payment, depending on the plan, to be able to have that coverage.
And that's why it's so critical for people to think about travel insurance. People spend lots of time planning their trips, doing research on WendyPerrin.com and figuring out what's the best price for airfare, for hotels, where to go. People put so much time and energy and research into the pre-trip planning that they kind of feel like they've reached the finish line when they've made their purchase. When in fact there's just one more step that can really benefit consumers, which is to look at travel insurance, how to protect that trip. And as Megan mentioned, the pre-existing condition waiver, as well as some other benefits, which we call in the industry time-sensitive benefits, are tied to when you've made that initial payment towards the trip. Maybe you paid for the whole thing, or maybe you just plunked down $50 as a deposit towards the trip. At that point in time, that's when you should go out and you should buy your travel insurance, or at least research it, because the clock is ticking, and some plans are 7 days waiting period, but many are in that 10 to 21 days. You have to buy your insurance within that time period in order to have the pre-existing condition exclusion waived. And so that's a really big one, often overlooked. But one other benefit, which I think is really relevant today, and if I can sort of jump into it, is another time-sensitive benefit called cancel for any reason. And again, that in order to qualify to purchase that benefit, you need to purchase your insurance within this time-sensitive time period, again, 10 to 21 days, depending on the plan. So you've plunked down your money, you made that initial payment, then you go out and you buy your travel insurance. If you're interested in cancel for any reason, it's typically sold as an optional upgrade and can be kind of expensive, but in the current environment, we see a lot of people opting to purchase it now. So again, it's time sensitive. So if you're the type of person that books your travel, you pay for it, and then 6 months later, you're coming up to your departure date, you start to think about travel insurance at that point, the coverage is going to be more limited. And quite frankly, if the reason why you are coming into the market and are interested in travel insurance is because of potentially something that may have happened at your destination, well, it's too late to buy insurance for that because that becomes a known event and it's no longer insurable. So again, like the biggest piece of advice I could give to people is think about the travel insurance right after you've made that first payment on your trip and lock it in. Your coverage is locked in, and you have access to sort of the full range of benefits at that point.
Yeah, I think cancel for any reason is definitely something that's important for travelers to know about, whether or not they choose to purchase it, just make an informed decision. Because we've seen in the last year and a half, situations arise where the travel insurance policy said, sorry, yes, the borders are closed. Yes, your flight was canceled, but this is not a qualified, a covered reason that you're canceling your trip. So can you, Stan, can you explain a little bit how cancel for any reason differs from a typical policy's trip cancellation?
Yeah. Sure. So a typical policy will have a section called trip cancellation and trip interruption, which will list all of the reasons that plan will pay a benefit for a cancellation. So that can range from 12 to 15 up to, in some cases, 30, 35 different reasons. And the unexpected illness or sickness or death in the family tends to be the most used reason. But there's a whole range of them, and as Megan said, including work reasons, school reasons, weather-related reasons, a whole host of things. Beyond those listed reasons, a plan will not provide cancellation coverage. So you don't read between the lines in a travel insurance policy. If there are 10 reasons listed for cancellation in that plan, those are the only 10 reasons that plan will pay for a cancellation. So it can be somewhat narrow. And just because you kind of wish or think to yourself a plan might provide coverage because it seems like common sense would say that that's what it should cover, if it's not listed in the plan, it's not covered. So that's where cancel for any reason comes in. Cancel for any reason as an optional upgrade is going to cover you for anything else. So you're already covered for those 10 reasons, but for any other reason out there, a cancel for any reason is going to provide cancellation coverage. Now, there are a few caveats to that, which is we talked about the time sensitivity. You can't buy it if you're outside of that time sensitive window. Typically, if you're 30 days out from when you made that first payment, it's not going to be available. You have to buy cancel for any reason when you make your initial travel insurance purchase. So if you buy the insurance without cancel for any reason, and a week later you decide, oh, I should have bought it with cancel for any reason, that could be problematic. And then the other couple of points that are important to note: cancel for any reason does not reimburse you for 100% of your trip costs. It's going to reimburse you, in most cases, 75% of your trip costs. There's some plans today that will reimburse you 50% of the trip costs. And those plans, lower coverage, they tend to be a little less expensive than the standard cancel for any reason. And then the last thing to consider about cancel for any reason, and by the way, we call it CFAR in the industry, so that wanted to slip out a few times. So if you're interested in CFAR, you can, and you have a policy with CFAR, if you paid for it, you have to make that cancellation up to 48 hours prior to your departure date. Once you're within 48 hours of your departure date, you can't use the CFAR anymore. You can still cancel because of one of those covered reasons listed, but outside of those reasons, you would not be able to cancel. And so if you think that CFAR is gonna give you the ability to wake up the morning of your trip before you go to the airport and you decide, I don't wanna go, unfortunately, that's not gonna work for you.
Or if you get your COVID test results back the morning of your flight and they're positive,
Correct.
then
Correct.
Yeah. So we, for example, we have travelers looking at booking Antarctica cruises for this coming, winter season, but are looking at the COVID case rates in Argentina right now and thinking, gosh, I'm not sure I'm going to be wanting to go to Argentina. If they purchase a regular travel insurance policy today, and then in December, they think, gosh, I'm nervous about flying into Argentina. My understanding is that they're out of luck. Fear of COVID is not a reason that they can get their money back. If they have a CFAR addendum to their policy, they can say, gosh, Argentina just doesn't look good. I know my Antarctica cruise is still going to happen, but I'm not getting on board. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
And how much more expensive, can you ballpark, what a CFAR policy will cost?
Well, if you think about a traditional trip cancellation plan ranging somewhere between 4% to 10% of the overall trip costs that you're insuring, adding a CFAR upgrade might actually add another 35 to 50% of the base cost of the plan. So in sort of simple math, at the high end, if your premium for a standard plan was $100, it might cost you $150 to purchase the plan with the CFAR, or call it $135 to $150.
Sherry, I'd love to bring you into the conversation here. We've heard that there are travel insurance policies that cover COVID medical bills if someone gets sick abroad. Where does MedJet come in there?
In the big picture, in the grand scope of, I'll start from the very basic, which is I frequently explain the way that MedJet works with travel insurance, or really on top of travel insurance, and then some additional types of coverage that you can get. Is we always recommend travel insurance. That is the cake of your coverage. MedJet, travel insurance, if you are in an accident or you are injured or ill, the medical evacuation component that comes with travel insurance is typically to the nearest acceptable hospital. So that's like your true medevac. If you were, I used this explanation when I went to Argentina with my husband, and he wanted to go to a gaucho ranch, and I was like, you're going to fall off a horse, and then what? So, my travel insurance through American Express, which not through the card, but the actual travel insurance, the medical evacuation component of that, had the ambulance gotten to, or a medical team gotten to him to take him to the local hospital, if they'd said, oh my gosh, this guy needs to be airlifted to Buenos Aires immediately, that is what the medical evacuation coverage of travel insurance does. Now, once he would have gotten to the hospital in Buenos Aires, that's typically where you stay. They pay for the bills and all of that, but you're typically required to stay there to the fullest until you've recovered to the fullest extent possible at that acceptable facility. And then typically, if you're discharged, trip interruption is what covers them rebooking you home, If it's going to be a very extended stay, or if you can prove that it's medically necessary to be moved to a further hospital, let's say that they got you to the little hospital in the countryside and they said that, you know, that he needed to be evacuated to Buenos Aires, that's medically necessary transport. What MedJet does, I'd say that we're kind of the icing on that. So once you're stuck in that Buenos Aires hospital, MedJet actually is what gets you moved from that hospital to your own hospital at home. That is not the purview of travel insurance unless you can prove for some reason that you absolutely positively can only be treated at this one hospital at home. So, you know, travel insurance and the medical evacuation of that is cake, and MedJet is the icing. And our people want to be able to get home. They like icing.
I hope your husband didn't fall off the horse.
I know. You know, and just in the things that travel insurance, like the small print that travel insurance doesn't cover, it's also little things like if you plan on doing any kind of what they would consider like a dangerous activity or quote unquote adventure travel. A lot of people don't realize that, you know, if you have an ATV accident, some policies may not cover you. If you are hang gliding, if you're skydiving, if you are motorcycles, sometimes they consider a moped a motorcycle. We had a member that, you know, she went on one of those excursion things with a sidecar, and the sidecar tipped over and she landed face down. And her insurance company actually told her that that was not covered because she was riding a motorcycle. So, you know, those are all the things. Like, be aware of what it is that you're going to be doing. Like, we don't have adventure travel exclusions, so I don't have a full list of like what the standard ones are. A lot of them exclude imbibing, you know, intentionally imbibing poisonous substances. So the blowfish is probably not covered. I wouldn't recommend that anyways, and things like that. So it is very, you know, it's important to read your policy and understand your coverage. And you know, same for us. Like, we encourage our members always, our rules and regulations are always up on our website, very transparent.
A few of our viewers asked about COVAC Global, which is a new membership program that will transport travelers back to the US only if they test positive for COVID and exhibit one symptom. It's more expensive than many other options out there. It's about $675 for one person for 15 days of travel. Sherry, can you talk a little bit about how MedJet differs from that COVAC Global option?
Yeah, when you take that cake image, right, there's the cake and then there's the icing. And I really look at COVAC Global as a very specific color and flavor of sprinkle. Some people like the sprinkles too. And, you know, they serve a very specific purpose, which is test positive, exhibit, you know, whatever their qualifying number of symptoms are. And then you qualify for transport. It is, you know, limited. That is the one special thing that they do. And, you know, people should not forget all the other illnesses and injuries that happened prior that continue to happen. A lot of vaccinated people, you know, unless they're testing positive to get back in, won't even know that they're positive. Or, you know, because the vaccine kind of mitigates symptoms. So they really do serve that one specific purpose. And, you know, a lot of people want that comfort level. So I think all three of them still work together. Is that I mean, does that help explain the difference?
I think so, yeah. And just to clarify, MedJet will transport COVID positive patients who are hospitalized from certain destinations. Correct.
Yeah. Right now, if you're traveling in the United States, in Canada, in Mexico, in Central America, in the Caribbean and Bahamian Islands, what else am I missing? We will transport for COVID. And we keep a list of all the territories that are covered. up on the thing. I know we just added Hawaii and Alaska. We had a lot of people asking about that, but those are different, those are long range jets that need to have the pods. So it took us a while to add those. And I know a lot of people are asking about, Europe and things like that. We haven't added that officially yet. We're talking about it. We can't make any promises, each thing as, they open, and we have to deal with what the rules are, with each of those countries. If their airspace is closed, like, India right now, their airspace is closed. Nothing's getting in and getting out. We cannot, nobody can circumvent that. That's their airspace, that's their business. You can't. But as far as getting people back in that are COVID positive, regardless of the CDCs, you have to test negative in order to get back in. Air ambulances are excluded from that. So.
And we had some questions about when you have to buy a MedJet policy, how far in advance of a trip. Can you talk about that?
If you're under the age of 75, you can enroll literally the morning that you're leaving. We have no pre-existing condition exclusions, so we don't ask any health questions. We don't even ask our members where they're going. It's if you're under the age of 75, you sign up or you sign your family up and you're good to go. If you're over the age of 75, we do have it's our Diamond membership, and we do have a brief medical questionnaire that is just a questionnaire. And then we have the people's doctors kind of sign off on that they should be traveling, that they're healthy enough that they should be traveling. So.
We did get one question from a viewer who has a South Africa safari planned, I think for this fall, and wanted to know which company will evacuate them if they test positive on this safari. They're vaccinated, but they're just, trying to cross those T's, dot those I's, what would happen? So the answer there, because it's Africa, I would say it would be a COVAC Global membership will get you home if you test positive. But as Sherry pointed out, keep in mind that there are a lot of other risks out there, a car accident, a broken leg or something. And that's where—
Falling off an elephant or, or the Jeep or the ATV or all of those. But yeah, the testing positive for COVID specific is the very specific thing that COVAC Global does.
Sure, you mentioned Indian airspace, and that kind of brings us to another topic about CDC and State Department advisories. I'd love to hear from you how MedJet memberships are affected by those advisories, and then from Megan or Stan about how the wider world of travel insurance policies are affected by those advisories.
Right, we've been getting that a lot lately just because there's almost 80 plus countries on level 4 right now. What we've been telling our members is our rules and regulations allow us discretion on level 3 and level 4 countries. But, the level 4 countries and cities or areas that we are typically concerned with are due to violence. Like COVID's there, COVID's out there. We know that. We're transporting for COVID from a lot of these territories. If something is a level 4, like Syria or Iran, or Iraq, there's certain states in Mexico that are level 4, Acapulco, just for extreme cartel violence. We don't send crews into that. But even though Jalisco as a state or Guerrero as a state is a level 4, right? Or even all of Mexico, we're still servicing Puerto Vallarta. We're still servicing like most of those cities that are perfectly safe from a security standpoint, but are level 4 just due to, and the other thing we're seeing is, the Bahamas, early on, the Bahamas, which is usually a level 2, was designated as a level 4, or it had an elevated, I think it was a 3, now it's a 4, but the level 3 was due to an increase in violence. I think, it's not a topic that is pretty, but there are so many tourist dependent destinations that are, opening back up again, that a lot of those places have been experienced. These are people whose economy has been shut off for over a year, and they definitely have seen an increase in crime against tourists. So like we're selling a lot of the MedJet Horizon memberships right now just because of that added concern about that. So, but the if anybody has a question as to what we are and are not covering, like a specific destination, unfortunately, it's like they should probably call us, because if there is a will and a way for us to get some, get a crew into a level 3 or a level 4, especially if it's COVID related, we do try. The entire globe was level 4 when COVID first happened, in March, and we still were able to get transports out and people home. So
Sherry, if I could just add, because I took a look at this just yesterday, and currently on the U.S. State Department Travel Advisory site, 152 countries are listed as level 4. Another 41 are listed as level 3. There are 16 countries in the world across the globe that are level 2. So it does pose as somewhat of a problem when you have basically the entire globe at level 3 or 4, or the 99% of the destinations that one would travel to. And so it's a combination maybe of being overly cautious and and it seems a little counter to this notion that destinations are trying to open themselves back up, and then you have these level 4s.
And what do travel insurance policies do about that? Does that mean your policy is void if you go to a place that's a level 3 or level 4?
Not necessarily, but the coverage is still somewhat limited. So there are some plans today that will have a covered reason for a level 4 if you're traveling to a level 4 travel advisory destination, and then something occurs after you've already purchased your insurance. Okay, so you're already insured, you're going to the Bahamas and it's a level 4 now. If something subsequent to you purchasing that plan were to occur and the provider's security team determines that it's a risk that would prevent, that you should not go as a result of that event, then there would be coverage. But again, that's a sort of a specific set of circumstances as determined by a security team of that, carriers, who has it. So again, it's unfortunately, in a scenario like that, you would like to have a cancel for any reason plan in place. And especially if you're booking a trip to something listed as a level 4 travel advisory by the State Department, you want to have sort of the most flexibility built into your plan as possible. And by the way, if you're doing that also, you want to make sure you have travel insurance, med jet, the icing, the sprinkles, and everything else.
Yeah, it is definitely a moving target these days. It is, that's why we have so many members calling us right now, just to like confirm individual territories. I mean, my own mom just got back from Puerto Vallarta, and I had her MedJet membership in effect, and for sure, if something happened, we would have been able to transport her regardless of the level 4.
So we're talking about all these things that are changing and a moving target. What happens if someone was planning really far in advance? They booked a trip back in 2019 that they're going to take in 2022. So COVID wasn't even a thing when they booked their trip and purchased their policy. Are they covered if they for trip cancellation or medical coverage if they get COVID before or during the trip? Megan, do you know?
So as we mentioned with trip cancellation coverage, the number one covered reason is illness, injury prior to leaving on your trip. So with the companies now covering COVID typically as any other covered illness, trip cancellation, most likely would be an option and be reimbursed for the cost of your trip, your prepaid non-refundable expenses prior to leaving if you were to contract the virus and be too sick to travel. So yeah, that's one thing we've seen with all the companies really adapting their plans to cover COVID as any other covered illness.
Okay, so that can adjust on the fly, even though you've already purchased the plan. It will now cover you for COVID. going forward.
For contracting COVID
Mhm.
Correct.
and being too
Yep.
sick to travel.
Right, yeah.
Yes.
I want to make sure we cover the kind of financial aspect, the other side of travel insurance that we mentioned. People have wondered in Sherry mentioned how the economies around the world are struggling right now. People worry, what if my hotel goes out of business and I've given them a deposit and now they've got my money. How does travel insurance cover your financial investment, and will travel insurance in that example, would they cover you if the hotel you paid a deposit to is no longer in business?
Yes, the short answer is there are plans that will cover you under a cancellation reason called cancellation for the default of a travel supplier, or the financial default of a travel supplier. It can be a little bit complicated the way it reads, but effectively there's some time considerations with respect to when you purchase the plan and that coverage, and when the travel supplier actually experiences a financial default or an insolvency. And but again, the short answer is if you are booked on an airline or you're booked in a hotel and they do experience an insolvency, or and it doesn't even have to be sort of a bankruptcy as defined or as thought about, traditionally. It can just be a financial insolvency, and so there would be coverage. It's one of those covered reasons where if you read the terms and you don't sort of understand it in that first reading, it's important to pick up the phone and call an agent with that provider and have them walk through the scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Where that covered reason doesn't actually provide coverage is if you've purchased through a travel agency, and that travel agency has purchased or maybe holding your deposits, and they have yet to purchase the hotel or tour, and that travel agency experienced a bankruptcy or a default. Unfortunately, that isn't covered under those financial default terms in travel insurance. It has to be the actual travel supplier.
Okay, good to know. We've seen a lot of people having to postpone trips, of course, in the past year. Megan, can you change dates on an insurance policy? Is there a number of times that you're limited to do that? And is it better to just buy a new policy? Can you talk about what to do if you have a trip that's postponed?
Sure. And we have definitely seen a lot of this over the past year. Our customer care department, I give them so much credit for how much time they've spent servicing a lot of different customers because this has been such a big thing. And different companies are handling it different ways. So some may just allow you to change the dates on your trip, and you're going to have to, some kind of proof that you your original trip was canceled, and there's no claims or anything against it, and be able to then move your dates to a future trip once that's been booked. Others might offer a type of voucher where you have, I guess, sort of credit for the plan that you've purchased. And once you do have the new dates booked, you can use that voucher and put it towards your new trip. So again, they may be looking for proof that, your trip was canceled, and to show that you're not going to be submitting any claims against the original policy. But the companies have been being pretty flexible and typically allowing people to rebook their trips up to, say, 2 years out from the original booking. So yeah, it's the companies have really adapted and become pretty flexible with what they're allowing.
Sherry, yeah.
Yeah, we're actually fully refundable up until the date that you've chosen as your effective date. So long as somebody calls us before the effective date, because once it's effective, we don't track our people. Like, we don't track our members' travel, especially if you have an annual one. You just are a member, and take as many trips as you want. But so long as we get the phone call prior to the expected trip departure date, then we're fully refundable.
I have to say, I was surprised by the number of questions we got about annual policies. I guess maybe this speaks to how excited our readers are to start traveling again and just planning to, kind of be nonstop traveling once they can start. Stan, when does it make sense to purchase an annual policy versus trip-by-trip coverage?
Well, I think it depends on, first of all, how many trips you may be taking in a given year, kind of where you're taking those trips, and what you are looking to insure. Most annual plans, although there are some exceptions to the rule, are primarily medical only. So there's not a trip cancellation component to it. And in some cases, it may cover a defined number of trips per year, and others are, as many trips as you want to take in a given year. Like I said, the exception is there are some plans that will offer a small amount of trip cancellation coverage. So I guess that's the starting point. If you are trying to insure the cost of your trips, it may make more sense to do individual plans. But if it's really the medical and the evac portion that you're interested in, then and you're making more than call it 4 trips a year, it probably does make sense to look at an annual plan, and it is more cost effective. Again, some of this depends on the type of travel you're doing. It also depends on the traveler's age, because like any insurance product, part of the pricing factor is a traveler's age. So it's I can't give you sort of the definitive answer, but my sort of general rule is if you're traveling more than 4 times a year, and you're a savvy traveler and you kind of, don't want to have to deal with travel insurance each time, and it's really just for the medical, then it's a perfectly good option. And then, you can also, again, consider the, the MedJet type plans and the annual plans there. Those sort of marry up nicely together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sherry, your most typical membership is an annual membership. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, we do have a lot of short terms. You can cover just an 8-day, 15-day, 21-day, or a 30-day trip. When you get up around 30 days, I think upgrading to an annual is an additional maybe $30. Like, get it like 11 more months for $30. Who doesn't do that? But believe it or not, we have people who take 1 trip a year. They do the 30-day every year, and I shake my head, but it's all about choice,
Megan, we've got some questions about countries like Costa Rica, for example, that have instituted specific insurance requirements in order to enter because of COVID. Can you talk about how a traveler makes sure that they're properly covered? I believe in the case of Costa Rica and probably many others, you need to have specific paperwork when you show up. It's as important as having your COVID PCR test. They're not going to let you in the country without this.
Right. So yes, that has been a very hot topic lately. And we have seen some companies, again, adapting their coverage to this, and also offering the coverage letter that you'll need to obtain your health pass, and a special QR code to be able to get onto your flight and be able to enter the country. So yes, we do have a few different companies that will offer the specific coverage needed. I want to say it's $50,000 medical and $2,000 for accommodations in the event that you're quarantined while you're there. And with the purchase of those plans, some will write in your confirmation and fulfillment package, have a letter that states the amount of coverage, and you need to upload that when you're applying for your health pass to get into Costa Rica. But other than Costa Rica, we've seen other countries also requiring some amount of coverage. They might not have specific limits, but it does say you have to have travel insurance, and some countries may recommend certain companies or plans, and so yeah, it's definitely something to look into when you're traveling, to know what your destination's requirements are, and if they are going to require either specific limits or just travel insurance in general, where you do have some kind of medical and travel delay coverage in the event that you're quarantined there and have to stay in a hotel or something longer than expected.
And this was a trend we actually saw even pre-COVID. Countries were starting to evaluate whether they were going to require proof of insurance before, allowing entry. One example was Thailand, where they were kind of getting tired of having tourists and foreigners come in, injure themselves, go into their hospital systems and not be able to pay their way, and then it became somewhat of a tax on their national medical or healthcare systems. And so there was already a trend in place where countries were starting to talk about requiring some form of coverage before allowing entry.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. We have just a few more minutes. Billy and Wendy, do you have any other questions we can get answers to quickly?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Okay. We have a lot of questions and I am really impressed. I mean, we have a lot of very smart travelers I'm really wowed by these questions. Okay. I've answered 10 of them. That's all I can even answer. There are 42 more. And this is only in the Q&A box. We've got even more in the chat box. So is there a way I can just go through some of these questions and we can get really quick answers? Like yes,
Sure.
no, or one sentence from one of you, because I want to get through them, okay? Because they're good.
It's the speed round.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Here's the first question. When I'm using the comparison sites, it's hard to know which characteristics of a policy are really important and which don't matter as much. Which things should I pay closest attention to?
Covered reasons in trip cancellation, medical limit, and I guess whatever, and pre-existing condition waiver.
Great. Okay. Next question. What happens if you are caught in a lockdown region or country, so you cannot continue with your travels and flights back home? Your flights back home get canceled due to local COVID outbreak. I don't know. Are you covered?
Yeah. Well, no. So that particular scenario is sort of a hole in coverage. There's a sort of a blind spot right now for that, and so in that scenario, most plans would be limited coverage. I mean, there's some nuances which might allow coverage, but that's one where you pick up the phone and talk to an agent.
Okay, great. Other than medical insurance coverage, does a credit card like Chase Sapphire cover? There are several questions about credit cards. And like, if you have coverage through a credit card, do you need more, and what more do you need?
So we do get that question sometimes, and I think it all depends. So typically the coverage on credit cards is a bit limited. The plans that we offer usually are a bit more comprehensive, may offer many more covered limits, higher medical limits. So I think it is, you just know what the credit card is covering, and then also compare plans on the site to see what coverage they may be offering. And also typically you have to be using that credit card for all of the travel arrangements to have them covered. So so I think it's just, research and knowing what's covered.
And Wendy, can I just quickly add, if I have a problem with my credit card, I want to talk to my credit card company. If I have a problem with a travel insurance plan, I want to talk to a travel insurance company, not a credit card company.
Good point. I have Travelex insurance for a safari, which I have already rescheduled from 2020 to 2021. And now I want to move it to 2022. Do the insurance companies allow more than one date change?
Go ahead, Megan.
As potentially, that would be something I'd say either call the company or where you purchased it through, and see if they will allow that, and if potentially an exception can be made.
Great. Okay, here's a good one because I had the same problem myself. I did extensive research on travel insurance after booking a trip for next February. There were no policies that covered the things we wanted without doing cancel for any reason. And that was over $8,000 for the insurance. It seems that if you look at the small print, very few things are actually reimbursed fully. What ideas do you have?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that question, quite frankly, but well, of course, as we pointed out, cancel for any reason is expensive, but it does give you the most flexibility for canceling, and it, unfortunately, it's only 75%. But when you're talking about the cost, the risk of losing everything versus only losing 25% of your trip, that is, I think that's a good option. And then again, reading the trip cancellation covered reasons in a plan to ascertain how many various scenarios are covered.
Great. Yes, Sherry.
I'm going to answer, I'm going to add to that, not as an insurance expert, but as a traveler, also know what your vendors are. Because a lot of airlines, you've got Alaska Airlines where they're now, it doesn't matter why or when you cancel a flight, there is no cancellation, there are no cancellation penalties anymore. So, if your insurance won't do it, you might want to look at just like the piecemeal, purchases that are along the way that you are insuring, and see what each individual component own, like the vendor's cancellation policy is. Because I feel like everybody's being pretty liberal to help people get back out on the road right now. So even if it's not covered by insurance, you might be able to, there might be some flex in there by the vendor themselves.
I would say as the travel world starts to open back up, however, I think there's a tendency, at least stuff that we're hearing, especially with, for instance, safari tour operators, they're not interested in going through another scenario where they're sitting on the cost of lots of cancellations. So I think you could expect to see a sort of a non-refundable, strict non-refundable cancellation policies, at some point again. There may be flexibility now, but that's not going to last.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a good one, I think. What does pre-existing condition really mean?
So typically a pre-existing condition is, anything that it could be a change in medication, something that you've been diagnosed with. And just to add a little bit more to that, the plans, they all have a look back period. Typically, it's somewhere between 60 to 180 days prior to purchasing the policy. So in the event you're making a claim and it's due to a medical reason, the company does have the right to look back into your medical records to make sure that what you're making the claim for isn't related to something that's happened within that time period prior to purchase. And as we mentioned before, the pre-existing condition waiver, if you do have that on your policy, that can waive the look back period, or them looking back into your medical records.
And what isn't considered a pre-existing condition is if you are on some sort of, you call it medication, and I'm using a fictitious example here, but if you're on a heart medication, for instance, and you've been on the same dose forever, and it's just a maintenance kind of a treatment, as long as you didn't have a change in medication in that prior 60 to 180 days, and as long as you didn't have to go seek medical attention from a doctor in the 60 to 180 days, if everything is status quo and you're just taking your medication as you normally would have, that's not considered a pre-existing condition.
Okay. Uh,
Sorry.
what if you have not personally contracted COVID? So you are well, but cannot continue with your trip because of an outbreak. So you're caught having to stay in the region you've been locked down in, and therefore can't continue with your itinerary, and you have to pay considerably more to stay where you are.
Cancel for any reason.
Yeah.
And some plans offer what's called interrupt for any reason. It works the same way as cancel for any reason, but it becomes effective once you've left and you're on your trip. Typically, that benefit becomes available when you've in 72 hours within your trip.
Interrupt for any reason.
After 72 hours into your trip, there would be that interrupt for any reason.
Why 72 hours?
I guess you have to be sort of invested in your trip for a period of time to invoke the interrupt for any reason.
You can't decide you just don't like the hotel and you want to go home.
Right. So in other words, because you can't do the cancel for any reason within that 48-hour period before departure, you can't kind of skirt around the rules by like saying, okay, I'm going to go, you land, and then you interrupt for any reason, and which is sort of the same result.
Okay. Here's one. How do I find out actual claims experience of travel insurance carriers? Thanks for helping with this complex topic. Do you understand that? I think what she's asking is like how often and how much do they pay claims? Like, are they really going to come through and pay a claim?
Wendy, the short answer is at travelinsurance.com, much like the other comparison sites, we have tens and tens and tens of thousands of reviews on both the product and from customers who actually had claims experience. So you can go in and you can see the 5-star ratings, you can see people's actual reviews of the process, and that's a great way to see which where the cream flows to the top.
Great. Can you speak about coverage for those taking cruises? It's kind of a broad question, but just like one little, would each of you have the single most important tip for coverage for somebody booking a cruise?
Missed connection coverage and missed port of call coverage.
Missed port of call coverage, that exists?
It became basically if you have ports on your itinerary and for the reasons listed there, typically it's weather or other types of reasons. If you aren't able to disembark at that port, they will pay you what's effectively a travel inconvenience fee, and it's maybe $100 or $200, but nevertheless, that is a feature in some plans that are designed for cruises. Wow,
I don't think they had that back when I was buying travel insurance for cruises. No, I mean, I've missed a bunch of ports. Mm-hmm. And it's sad when, I mean, there are travelers out there who they'll choose a cruise because they really want to go to, they're dying to go to this one port. They've dreamed all their lives of this one site they're going to see, and then that's canceled. So that's great to know. Although I don't know if $100 is going to make up for missing my bucket list site.
Well, it doesn't hurt.
Right. Okay. Okay. I know we're over time. Do you guys have time for just a few more of these questions? Because they're really good. You sure you're not too hungry for dinner yet? Okay, great. If you don't have pre-existing conditions or non-traveling family of concern, does it make a difference when you buy the insurance?
So,
go ahead, Megan.
Sorry. Yeah, so if you're not concerned about pre-existing conditions for yourself or non-traveling family members, technically you can buy a comprehensive plan up until the day before departure. It's really it's those time-sensitive benefits such as pre-existing conditions, CFAR, a couple of other benefits as well, that you're really need to purchase the plan within 2 to 3 weeks after your initial payment for the trip.
Okay. Is there any downside to purchasing the insurance offered on an airline website when buying my flight?
So looking at those, typically they are very limited in what they cover, and also a lot of times will work in favor of the airline versus the customer. So when we're posed with that question, we do recommend that travelers look at comprehensive plans and compare what's out there versus just clicking buy at the point of sale of the airline ticket.
And if I could just add to that, you're basically when you're shopping on an airline site, you're basically being force-fed one option from one carrier. You're not able to actually compare across other carriers. And so you can actually likely find a more cost-effective plan with better benefits from another carrier by going to a comparison site.
What kinds of things have you seen people try to make cancellation claims for that were rejected if they didn't have CFAR coverage? So what cancellation claims get rejected most often?
Yeah, so I'd say just general fear of travel. That's been a big thing as COVID, has been a thing. Lockdowns, either they can't leave their state or, the country they were going to is under a lockdown. A lot of stuff like that, which a lot of people did think that travel insurance would cover, is what we're seeing. And really with those, CFAR is the only option at this point.
So if you purchase cancel for any reason coverage, you're already on a trip and the borders close, visa suspended, so you can't continue your trip. Are you covered? If not with cancel for any reason coverage, how do you protect yourself? Doesn't cancel for any reason coverage, that only goes up until before your trip. After that, it would be the interrupt for any reason, right?
Correct. Yes.
Potential.
Yeah. Yes.
Cancel for any reason basically only covers you up until what, 48 hours ahead of your departure time?
That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is not great in the time of COVID, because if you're, what I mean is, this is what happened with my son, is that he had to get tested before he went on a trip, right? He had to get tested a couple of times before he flew. And so you're getting the results of your COVID test within 48 hours of the trip. In other words, if you find out within 48 hours that you've tested positive and then you can't take it, the cancel for any reason doesn't cover you. What do you do about that?
Right,
you get mad at someone.
Okay. Well, the good news is he tested negative each time, so I didn't have to get angry at anybody. Okay. Do you have, I think we've answered this, but I'll ask it again. Do you have to buy MedJet within a certain number of days of booking the trip, as you have to do for basic travel insurance? And I think, Sherry, you answered this earlier.
Yeah, no, under age 75 can sign up. You just need to enroll prior to travel. So we have people, we occasionally get the couple in the car where they each thought that they did it, and you can hear them kind of like bickering in the car while they're on the phone signing up, like in the driveway before they leave. So, I mean, you can do it that quick.
Okay.
75, it is a longer process because of the questionnaire and the doctor signing off on it. And depending on how quickly your doctor can get forms back, then we typically recommend doing that within 60 days of your trip.
Wendy,
yes.
If I could just jump in, I think there are a couple of points I was hoping would come out, and I just want to just throw them out there, really quick hits here. We're talking about travel in the time of COVID and the protections that are available, not available. One thing that people should, really consider is, again, as the travel world opens back up, a lot of airports, a lot of the travel infrastructure hasn't really been used or stressed over the last year. And so you're bound to run into snafus that you might otherwise not have seen pre-COVID. So whether that be like missing bags or bags not showing up in destinations, travel insurance actually can protect against that. Baggage delay, lost baggage is a feature. In addition to that, it's May 6th. May 31st tends to be the start of the Atlantic hurricane season. And so I hate to throw another sort of wrench into the travel plans, but if you are traveling to hurricane destinations between May and September, October, November, you would want to consider a travel insurance plan, because again, a hurricane warnings tend to be pretty standard covered reasons in most travel insurance plans. So and likewise the wildfires, which seem to now have a season for themselves. These are disruptions that many travelers haven't really thought about, but may want to consider, and a travel insurance plan is going to actually really provide great value and protection for those situations.
Here's another. How does MedJet get people back in the country who are sick with COVID when the US won't let people back in when they test positive for it?
Air ambulances are exempt from that rule. I always forget what the subsection of the rule is, but for Canada and the United States. So, our transports are, if you're in the hospital and you're in a contained pod, it's like they know that you're leaving with a very experienced crew. You're being put onto a private plane with a secure pod, and you're landing at an airport and being taken to yet another secure location, which is a hospital that has pre-admitted you. So those are that process is exempt.
Okay. Here's a question I've had too. If these arcane questions, if someone is using award miles for airfare, should there be any amount relegated airfare be included in determining the cost of the trip?
No. You insure just the cash portion of your trip. Rewards and airline miles are not insurable, though some plans will actually have a benefit to reimburse you for the cost of redepositing those miles or rewards.
One follow-up question to that, I think people wonder, do I cover only the non-refundable parts of what I'm paying for the trip, or the entire bill?
You cover the non-refundable prepaid trip costs or costs that are subject to cancellation penalty or some kind of a change fee.
How does MedJet's evacuation coverage, it says insurance, but it's not insurance. How does MedJet's evacuation service compare to other providers that include that in their policy?
Again, the medical evacuation component of travel insurance and like your credit card benefits, if you look at the fine print on it, or the last time I purchased it from American Express, because I work at MedJet, and I'd never heard them actually disclose this before, he said, it's $1 million of medical evacuation. Keep in mind that is to the nearest acceptable facility. So that true evacuation is what gets you from like a point of injury or from like a little tiny hospital to a much bigger trauma center. That's the medical evacuation component of travel insurance. MedJet is additional. MedJet is what gets you moved from that hospital in Buenos Aires or the hospital in Tahiti to your own hospital at home. That's not the purview. I mean, that's the niche that we fill.
Great. Okay, is there a downside to just paying premiums for the deposit you've spent for your insurance and adding to the policy as you get closer to the trip and pay the remainder of the balance?
So,
Megan, do you want to go?
so if I understand correctly, you're saying when you first purchase the insurance, only cover what you've actually paid for so far, maybe a deposit. And then as you go along, insure those subsequent payments. And we see a lot of people doing that. And if you do have some time-sensitive benefits on your plan, that is something that is important. You're going to want to keep track of. So
Have we lost Megan?
We may have lost Megan.
Oh, there we
Can you
go.
hear me now?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay,
Wireless
I'm
headphones
sorry,
ran out of battery.
my headset just died on me.
Oh man.
Sorry, we're
Okay.
keeping you guys so late. I'm so sorry, but these are great questions.
No
And we
worries.
still have a lot of people. We have a lot of people still hanging on, wanting to hear the answers. So
Yeah, so apologies for that. So when you have time-sensitive benefits, say it is pre-existing conditions, CFAR, you can just insure initially the deposit that you've paid. And then as you make for future payments, you want to make sure that you're calling the insurance company right away after you make that payment to add that. And it's going to, increase the cost of your policy because you are insuring additional trip cost. But that is a way that you can do it and also keep the time-sensitive benefits on active on your plan. But you do want to be very careful. And when you do make any additional payments that are prepaid, non-refundable, you want to make sure that you're calling the insurance company or wherever you purchased it through right away to add those additional costs.
mm-hmm. So here's somebody saying, so this is interesting because we heard before about the problem with changing the dates of your trip. What if your trip gets postponed and then postponed again? And how many times can you change? This person says, for what it's worth, I have a policy with CSA and they have allowed me to change dates 4 times already with no problem. And that has allowed me to keep my pre-existing condition waiver. They say I can change dates indefinitely as long as I keep them updated on the cost of the trip, which can change by season, and allow them to evaluate the premium based on cost. I'm not sure I understood all of that, but.
Basically, what CSA is saying is that we're going to work with you, and there's flexibility, and we understand that the dates are changing. You may change a number of times, and as long as you continue to ensure any sort of subsequent trip costs or changes in trip costs, and you'll preserve the pre-existing condition waiver. And I think they're making some nice accommodations.
Good. Okay, here's one for Stan and Megan. What's the difference between Insure My Trip and travelinsurance.com? Presumably you both offer the same thing. Why would I choose one of you over the other? Don't be shy.
Well, I'll go, and then Megan, you can own me. But travelinsurance.com is actually the probably the newest entrant into the comparison market space. We've been at it for a little under 10 years. Our competitors in Insure My Trip and some others, been at it for like 20 years. But when we came into the market, we saw a situation where it was still very complicated to shop for, compare, and buy travel insurance. And so our approach was focus on transparency, focus on simplicity. Our tagline is travel insurance made easy. So, we also decided we were going to work with really the most recognizable top travel insurance carriers. And instead of working with everyone under the sun, we would limit it to the sort of the top names. And so our idea was, let's make it as easy, strip out as much of the complexity as possible for the consumer, so they could shop for, purchase in a self-service way on their own with total confidence. And I'd say that, to be fair, I think there are others that are doing a really good job of that as well, because I think, for us, it's critically important that consumers understand the products and they know what they're getting, and especially they know what they're not getting. And so that education is a priority for our company and for all the companies out there today.
Right. And I think we have similar goals. And, we have teams that are, looking at the website and purchasing patterns and what we can do to make things easier for customers. We have a whole team of people that, make sure that the right information is showing when you quote certain plans and all of that. The marketing team is constantly looking, where can we educate people more? And, with COVID being such a big thing, putting up COVID related information and having a system that can actually recommend plans based on your travel information. So as we mentioned, hurricane season is coming up. So, if you're traveling to a certain destination that's going to be under a hurricane warning, we have our smart system that takes many different data points and will recommend the best plan for your trip. And one thing with our company is we do have what we call our anytime advocates. So if you purchase a plan through Insure My Trip and something happens, you need to file a claim. If the claim is denied and you want us to take a second look at it, we do have customer care representatives that will do that. They'll look through it, they'll work with you, and also act as a mediator, I guess, type with the insurance company. And over the years, we've had a very good success rate with our agents being able to help customers get the money that they deserve. So I think with us and all the competitors out there, our goals are the same: to make purchasing travel insurance easy and to also educate and help the customer all the way through the process. So not only purchasing the insurance, but also after the fact.
Here's another one. I'm very curious to hear your answer to this. Travel agents always recommend insurance from their, quote, preferred provider. I always go to one of the comparison sites instead. Is there any advantage to using the preferred provider the agent recommends?
Not necessarily. I mean, when you're using the agent's preferred provider, it's a one size fits all typically. Maybe there are a couple levels that they can offer you, but you're not going to get an opportunity to potentially price shop, and so, yeah, I mean, we think that really to find the best policy at the best price, the only way you're gonna do that is by shopping on a comparison site. Having said that, some of the travel agents will offer the same products that you'll find on a comparison site, and for the same trip costs and the same sort of trip details, the pricing is going to be the same. So as a matter of convenience, it might be advantageous to purchase it from your travel agent, and they're going to have all of your trip details right there. And if you have to make a claim, they'll have everything sort of ready and can be helpful to you. In my experience, I found that again, that one size fits all at the travel agents is similar to that experience when you're online shopping on an airline or one of the like Expedia or Orbitz. You're served up a sort of a one option, checkbox, take it or leave it, when you can really benefit from going out, spending like literally 3 minutes to compare and find a policy on your own.
Mm-hmm. But if the travel agent has like a close relationship with the preferred provider, does that mean maybe they have some juice to get your claim paid that you might not have on your own, or that you might not get through a comparison site?
I haven't seen that. Somebody is saying that they have it. The claims departments of the travel insurance companies operate distinct from the departments that manage the relationship with those travel agents. So, maybe there is a phone call that could, be lobbed in, but I guess my suggestion in those scenarios, if you like shopping with your travel agent, ask your travel agent to go to a comparison site and give you kind of all of the available options out there.
So people still keep asking questions. You think we would have made a dent, but we've still got 24 questions because people keep submitting more. But it's almost, we've kept you an hour and a half. What do you guys want to do? You got to go. Or
I do, but Wendy, if you think there's a demand for it and you want to maybe do another one of these days, I'd be very happy to participate again.
well, thank you very much. We appreciate that very much. I guess we'll call it a day then, but I don't know how. I mean, I guess we'll save all of these burning questions for next time. Thank you so much, Megan Walsh and Stan Sandberg and Sherry Howell thank you so much for joining us. This was really much more interesting than one might assume it would be. And we really appreciate your time and your insights and your expert advice. And I hope that all of you viewers and listeners will come back and join us tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. We've got our final session of Wow Week, which is going to be about winter holidays. They're actually starting to book up fast. And we're going to be talking about not just, sort of under the radar places you can go to get a great value over the Christmas, New Year's holiday and also over Thanksgiving, but we're also going to be looking at winter travel in general and like January, February, what are the countries that are going to open up? What do we think is going to be safe enough? And we're going to have more of our Wow list travel experts from all over the world joining us. So we really look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And thanks again so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you, Billy.
Thank you, everyone. It was great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks
Okay.
for the invite.
Take care.
It was
Stay
fun.
safe.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.